Well, certainly, if you let the clip extend a little more, and I think Becky Quick picked up on it also, he started talking about his history of how he's handled debt in the private sector and how he's restructured it, how he's convinced creditors to accept less than 100 cents on the dollar. And he basically started to say the same thing about treasuries, that we can't repay the debt, we can't service it if interest rates go up, so it needs to be renegotiated, it needs to be restructured. We need to ask our creditors to take a haircut, which means telling people that own U.S. treasuries they're not going to get paid 100 cents on the dollar. And then when Becky Quick heard that, she basically asked him, well, wait a minute, are you talking about playing with our credit rating or our, and understood that what he meant. He tried to backtrack, and then he started talking about, well, no, I want to refinance the debt. But it can't be refinanced. We've already got the lowest rates possible. If rates go up, refinancing doesn't help. The only thing that helps is restructuring. You know, it's mathematics, just like Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico can't pay because they're broke. Well, math applies on the mainland just like it applies in Puerto Rico. We can't pay either. And if interest rates go up, Donald Trump is right. We have no choice but to, ask our creditors or tell our creditors they're taking a big haircut.
And it's interesting, Peter, because he also said in that interview that he likes Janet Yellen. He stands behind her policies. He might not necessarily keep her in place, but that interest rates do need to remain low as the solution.
Well, he said they have to stay low because we can't afford to let them go up. But he also recognizes that we have a bubble, and he wants to make America great again. And if we're going to make America great again, we need higher interest rates. We need more savings. We need more production. We need less debt and consumption. So to get great again, we need to recreate what made us great in the first place. And so we're going to have to let interest rates go up. And a big part of that is going to be admitting that we can't pay the debt. And, when China talks about the leverage we have over the Chinese, maybe he's talking about defaulting on the debt that they owe. After all, they can't vote in our elections, so why don't we just default?
Based on the commentary from this morning and what we've heard from Donald Trump so far, do you think he has what it takes to make America great again? Do you think he has the audacity to let those rates rise, something that a lot of people wouldn't want to do right now?
Well, I hope so. I think he has a pretty good understanding of how bad the problems are, because they are very bad. Most politicians don't want to acknowledge that, but I think he's acting like a politician in that he's talking about all the great things that could eventually happen, but, there's a lot of pain before we're going to get that gain. In order to restructure the economy, in order to have the kind of tax reform that Donald Trump wants, we're going to have to do a lot of cutting when it comes to government spending. Donald Trump talks about not cutting Social Security. We've got to do that. He talks about spending more money on national defense. We can't do that. We have to spend less. If we're going to be great, we have to shrink government, not make it bigger.
Is there any chance, Peter, that the solution to the problem is simply to default?
Well, I think it's going to have to, because we have to have higher interest rates. There's no question that we can't keep artificially suppressing interest rates, or the dollar's going to collapse. We're going to have runaway inflation. So we're going to have to do something, and we're not going to have real capital investment unless we have genuine savings. And no one's going to save when interest rates are zero or negative, and they're already negative now when you factor in inflation. So we're going to have to raise interest rates. But then when interest rates go up, it is impossible to service the debt. Forget about repaying it. We can't even pay the interest. So we're going to have to deal with that, and people are going to have to realize that the so-called risk-free asset, U.S. Treasuries, isn't risk-free at all, because people that own them are going to take a haircut. They're not going to get paid 100 cents on the dollar, and if they are, it's going to be because the dollar has collapsed, and what they get paid will be worth even less. But, Trump takes a lot of flack about his support for tariffs. Look, tariffs are a lot better than the income tax. The reason that we got the income tax is because the public didn't want tariffs. We were sold a bill of goods. The 99% wanted the income tax to tax the rich because the politicians said if we have an income tax, we can get rid of the tariffs. Well, now the populist movement is they want to bring the tariffs back. Fine, but let's get rid of the income tax. If we want to undo the deal we made with the devil 100 years ago, we need to get rid of that income tax, because now the income tax is taxing ordinary Americans at rates that nobody would have even contemplated for the Rockefellers or the Carnegies or the Vanderbilts. I mean, that shows all the Bernie Sanders supporters how dangerous it is when you're waging class warfare, because it comes back and bites you, because the income tax is now hurting the middle class, not the rich.
Peter, if there were to be a default, would it lead to a collapse in the dollar?
Well, the dollar's going to collapse either way, but I think it'll collapse less if we're honest about our debts and admit that we can't pay. Because if we try to pay everybody off by printing money, then the dollar is going to implode. And I think our creditors will lose a lot more to inflation and dollar collapse than if we legitimately restructure and just pay them fewer dollars than they loaned us, but at least those dollars will still buy something.
Jeff Kilberg, question for Peter.
No, Peter, I appreciate your perspective. It's always great having you on the show, but explain to me how Argentina, who wanted to default, was not allowed to default. Paul Singer of Elliott Management brought that home. So how would the United States of America default, and how would they be allowed to default? I don't see that as a plausible outcome.
Well, first of all, you're talking about Argentina on foreign currency debt versus on peso debt, but it's not a question of being allowed to default. I mean, yeah, well, I mean, look, the United States has defaulted before, right? In 1971, we defaulted on our promise to pay gold. If you own dollars, we owed you gold. And then Nixon said, we're not going to pay what we promised. So we have a history of default. We did it once, and we're going to do it again because repayment is impossible. Again, as I said, this is mathematics. Just like Puerto Rico, we can't pay. We borrowed much too much money, and there's no way we can pay it back. That's the main reason that Janet Yellen still has interest rates at zero or close to zero, because if she let them go up, we would have to default right now.
Peter, so I just want to recap before we let you go. Basically, the takeaway that I'm getting from this conversation is that you're saying we would have to default here in the United States in order to save the economy long term, and you're also adding to the fact that we need to abolish taxes.
We don't need to. I'd like to abolish a lot of them. A lot of the direct taxes that our founding fathers only envisioned we would use in wartime. Yes, get rid of the personal income tax, the corporate income tax, the payroll tax. We should fund our government on excise taxes, like a sales tax or a value-added tax or a tariff. But in order to do that, we need to have a much smaller government, like the government we used to have when America was great. So if we want to make America great again, we have to go back to the principles that made her great in the first place, and that's limited government and sound money.